Hello, everybody. Evan Abrams here on the Motion Design Hotline, the show we do most Mondays at 4 o'clock. I'm, of course, Evan Abrams. Usually, I am joined by Kyle Hamrick, but unfortunately, in keeping with today's theme, he is in a DC airport being slowly melted. I wish that was a joke. That is what's happening to him right now. So you are stuck with just me, and I'm going to take you through the stuff that we got prepared today. Let's all just send cooling vibes to our absentee co-host Kyle, and hopefully he gets to the hotel soon. Would be nice for him. But yeah, then you can enjoy all of the air conditioning off of the tarmac. But yes, he continues with an ordeal. So anyway, today I'm here. We're going to be answering an important question that came to us, kind of in keeping with sort of the heat and stickiness. We're going to look at sticking things together or make them appear to stick together inside of After Effects. So that's your kind of glorpy, string cheese pulling, melting, goo, gack, all of that good stuff. Does anybody remember gack? Great toy from the 90s. So if you have stuff going on, if you have problems in After Effects, if you have quandaries about what you want to accomplish and you can't quite get there, get a hold of Kyle and I. I'm at EC Abrams all over the internet. Kyle is Kylosaurus Rex. And you can always use the form that we have in the description, motiondesignhotline.com, a real website for real people where you can submit all of your troubles, but get at us on Instagram or Twitter or X or whatever. You can find us on all the places. You ask us the questions. We try to solve them. So that's the idea. Let's get into today's problem, and thanks everyone for hanging out. Monica, hello. Hey, Rick H, what's going on? Umacorn, of course. Clever Devlin. Jess, hello. Barbara, hey. Jack, holding it down. Keys, what's going on? Robert, hello. Everyone's with us. And hey, Monica, hey, what's going on? Over in the YouTube chat. There's people in YouTube as well. So yeah, let's get into my screen and catch the ick, I guess, is what we'll be doing here. So the idea is it would be nice if when things drifted apart, they got a little sticky. And that was kind of the thesis of what was being asked of us, of how do we achieve this kind of stickiness. Obviously, we could always get our solid points, our solid objects, animate those around, and then just manually draw the strands and the glorp and all of that stuff if we wanted to. We could frame by frame, traditional animation style, do that. Of course, that is not why people come to the Motion Design Hotline. You come here for us to solve problems that otherwise you don't want to hand draw all of this stuff. So that's the idea, that we're going to try to solve this. And there are many ways we could approach this particular problem. So we're going to look at a vector solution. We are going to look at a raster solution. And then we are going to look at a kind of more procedural, what I'm going to call the pizza solution, which in this case is using a lot of sort of fractal noise and effects to get this kind of glorpy cheese situation happening. So having things kind of drag and melt and move away from each other, but in a procedural way, so that, again, I don't have to animate all of these things. That's not what we want to be doing, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you're with us. If you have any questions about what you're seeing, what I'm doing, ask me in the chat. I'm looking at the chats. They're in front of me, and so we'll get into those. But let's start, I think, with the most basic form of this idea. So let's get into what I'm going to call basic shape layer stickiness. So here we have what are three ellipses, and they're all moving around, and as they move, they collide strong with each other, then they glorp out, and then they stretch, and the stretchiness kind of snaps off of them. So that's kind of the idea. If you want to achieve this type of thing with some vectors, there's actually not that much to it. It takes a little bit of a trick trick of the light here with how this works, but I'll show you how we do it from scratch. And it doesn't have to be circles, it can be squares, it can be shapes, it can be whatever. I like to use basic shapes just because it kind of helps us out. So let's say we go ahead with some ellipses. I'm just going to fill this in with white, and I'm going to just double click over here so we get an ellipse of some size. It doesn't really matter for our purposes. Again, this could really be any kind of shape that you're working with. Okay, so we create paths, and I want you to just keep in mind that within shape layers, there is a lot of hierarchical stuff going on, as in the order and way that you organize things within the contents of a shape layer is important, and it will be very important as we move forward with this. So we've got ellipse 1, and I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate it to make ellipse 2, and I'm going to drag this over. And it's important to notice that what I'm doing is I'm changing the transform of ellipse 2, and we know that because when I click on this situation over here, the bounding box looks like this. So as I'm dragging these things around, you can also see here in the shape transform of our properties panel, you're going to see those things update here. So that's when you know you're dragging the right thing. We don't need to drag the layer around. We have to drag around the internal contents of this thing. So I'm going to just move these to be pretty close to each other, and I'm going to set keyframes on, let's say just for now, the position of these. So we're toggling on the keyframes. Nice to be able to do that in the properties panel so that things are nice and organized. And then I just tap the U key a couple times and we get our keyframes isolated down here, and we want to move them in time. And I will just go ahead and now go forward a little bit, and we'll move these apart from each other. So they're just going to kind of drift apart like that. And we want some amount of glorp to be between them. So here's where things get a little bit wacky. We are going to add to this what's called an offset paths. And the offset paths, as you can see, is just drawing wider, larger around the stuff. So it's getting a little bit wider. Instead of a mitered joint, I'm going to change that to a rounded joint, which doesn't really matter at this point. But then I'm going to duplicate that, have offset path 2, and we are going to move sort of inward. So we're going to come back in. So it's going out and it's coming back in by the same amount. And then I'm going to add into this what is called a merge paths. If we stick the merge paths there, suddenly it's changing in a different way. So let me break down what we're looking at and why does this work? Why does this happen? Why do we end up with gloopy glorp that seems to have a finite radius where it kind of snaps? If we toggle these things off, and it's nice to be able to poke the little eyeball inside of the layer and you don't have to see these things. So right now, these are considered two separate and distinct vectors. They're two separate hulls. When we merge them, if we're using something like the add or the merge, then this is now currently being treated as one single vector object. And then if we were to offset that path outwards, we are offsetting the one singular path outside, right? But then if we were to offset back in, remember this is all one hull, all one thing, then when we put it back in, because we are using rounded joints, if this were a mitered joint, it would still look pointy like that. You can see a little bit happening in there. Because it's a round joint, we end up with this roundedness as it goes apart like that. And very usefully, at least for our purposes, these two numbers, as long as they remain the same, are going to produce this type of result. If you wanted this to be more extreme, you just have to use larger values. So I will parent the amount to the amount, and then I'm going to twirl down into here. Or sorry, I'm pick whipping from amount to amount. And then within the expression, just a little bit of math, multiply, the asterisk is our multiply by -1. So it's always going out and in by the same amount. And then I really only have to keyframe the one value over here if I wanted this to be a little bit more extreme. Now, the reason you probably will want to do that is, and we're just going to toggle into here, and we are going to make these kind of drift through each other a bit like this. So we're going to have them kind of cross like that. This is kind of a gross kind of thing. Blorp like that. So as they get close together, you can see there's like a magnetism that it's reaching out. Hey, Katarina, how you doing? Rolling over on the YouTubes. Stuart, what's going on? So here we have this thing, and as they get close, it seems to like reach out for each other. And that's why it's really useful for us to be able to come down here into this offset paths and to be able to just say, hey, we just don't need that to be happening right now. So we're going to bring that down like that, something like 38. Maybe we need to come down even more. Like only at a certain point when these things are mushing into each other do we really care if it's happening. So we will just go ahead and bring this value down, 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 down like that. So they only kind of intersect like this. And then when they mush through each other, this is when the value needs to be higher like that. So we'll say, what's the ending value we really want these to be? And this is going to be kind of the break where they have fully separated like that. So now you can see separate and then glorped together and then separate, right? So that's kind of a basic idea. And when you have objects like this, it works out pretty well. In the example that I showed earlier, where we've got 3, it's the exact same idea. They're coming together, they're blorping apart. The more complex these hulls sort of become, or the whole situation gets, it can get a little bit confusing and wacky. In fact, one way that this can become strange is if we say, apply this basic vector method out here. So this is a thing that I've called the oops over here. We're applying the exact same idea to this, that we are using, get into the stuff, here's our contents. Same thing, these are 3 things, they're being merged, we're using that offset to make this stuff happen, and these things are just moving apart from each other. But as that amount goes up, notice how even internally with the angles of the K, that's becoming sticky and it's starting to blend into each other. And you don't really want that to happen. So a solution to that, if you find that this is blorping in ways that we don't want, what you'd really want to do is really start to divide out what should stick to what. And we'll see kind of how that works when I just kind of dive in. I just want to get to, yeah, something like this, probably right around here. So you can see that this is stretching, this part is not stretching. Now, why would that be happening, right? Why would that be going on? Hey, Chris, jumping back in the chat. How you doing? So in here, inside of the contents, we've got the I, the C, and just this rectangle of the K. Just the part of the K that we're interested in, I'm going to make fewer mouth sounds of this type into the microphone. That's it's going to be really mesophonic, I think, for a lot of people. So here, we're just leaving this particular shape, and it has the same movement as the rest of the K, but this is the only part of the shape that we're interested in for that to happen. Now, you can sometimes get similar problems with like the shape of the C. So the shape of the C needs to remain rigid. The sort of kind of hard shape that it needs to stay. So I've placed a copy of that outside, and that way it will always remain rigid. So if we remove sort of the duplicate C and I kind of track through, you can see some of these little errors that are happening down here. And that's not working for me. So you just put a copy of the C over it. No one's going to notice. It's totally fine. Don't worry about it. That's not a problem. And you get to cover up a lot of these a lot of these problems. Now you may notice a little bit of pixel tearing like this. So just a little bit of cleanup that you might want to do on that is using something like the old Minimax. You can drop the old Minimax on here. Bloop. Nice bit of business. And we'll say, give me the maximum of the alpha, and we'll just give ourselves sort of boop, one of those, or give me the maximum of the alpha / color. And there we go. So we expand by 1 pixel border over everything, and we don't worry about it. So it's a nice way to cheat those types of things if that ever happens. So something to think about there. So that's one kind of vector tool, I want to say, in your tool belt. And if you are exploring this type of thing, don't think of yourself as kind of just limited to the hulls as they are. Draw new hulls, right? Like if you needed this to extend further and to just be there, well, you can always just make your own shapes. And you can draw those in, and they can get thinner as they move apart. If you wanted kind of a cheese effect to this, you might draw a couple of those. So we'll have something like that. And it's really just down to whether or not you can overcome the size of the hull that is in the middle, but you can also do subtractive things. So this minus that, those types of things. So that'll get you there. But oh boy, I've talked for 17 minutes already, so we got to move on to another method. I really thought I was going to get more methods in today, so we're going to find out. We don't need do it open. That can be closed. Yes, sorry. Let's get to burp, something with a little bit of color in it. So what if we wanted these things to blend in more of a rastered way, we might say? So let's come into here, orbs. Here we have 3 orbs, and the orbs are just having a good time moving around. That's all. Some moving orbs. No glorping, nothing happening. We're going to apply the glorping on top, so that will be coming later. That means anything that you do inside of, so make sure I can see all of the chat all of the time. There we go. Everything that you're going to do to this will take place outside. And as a rastered, effects-driven type of thing, this can be very freeing so that you can work up sort of what we would call the rigid bodies of your simulation, in this case. Then we can come back and we can do the gross stuff to that. So we're going to come back to the composition that lives in. And inside of here, we have, get our effects controls for orbs. And we got a bunch of stuff going on. And we'll try to work through it one problem at a time until we arrive at the end of this. But, oh, and actually there's a big old glare on my monitor. Hold on. There we go. That's gotcha. So inside of this, how are we causing this type of thing to happen? Now, the most basic thing to understand about how all of this comes together is that we start by blurring. Make blurry. That's all. Just make everything blurry. And then after you have blurred in some way, we need to clamp. And so if we blur and then clamp, and the Gauss in the house blur, Gaussian blur, it's just applying a nice blur. You could use a fast blur. You could use a box blur. You could use a channel blur. You could use all kinds of blurs. Whatever blur. I've said it enough times it doesn't mean anything anymore, but whatever blur you like, give that a go. You blur it out, and then you come in to apply a levels or a curves. You apply it specifically to the alpha channel because we are going to crunchitize this down. So I will simply reset that, and let's have a look at the alpha. And as we pinch these towards the middle, you end up with this. So you end up with this idea, a very crispy edge around the outside, bringing in the average of everything that was going on. It's almost exactly the same as what's happening on the offset. It's going out, then it's going back in, But in this case, we are sending the alpha out and then crunching the alpha back in. It can be helpful to keep these kind of values in mind, that we're trying to crunch both of these to the middle. So from 0 and 255, they're coming back down to 126 and 128, leaving a couple of pixels going on in between. So there we go. But that's our keys, but not edge blur. Don't do that one. Many blurs will work. Some blurs will not. What is the other one? There's like the blur that makes everything kind of liney. That would be the well, maybe directional blur wouldn't be particularly good. Vector blur, definitely not. Anyway, not all blurs. Hashtag not all blurs in this. But once you've got your kind of levels clamped down and your blur happening, and the blur is being keyframed to get more or less blurry, you can kind of notice a bit of a problem here, right? That the as things get blurrier, they kind of go away and they change in size. So we put back some stuff. So we use the CC composite or CC composite, and this can be set to in front, and we're just referencing the original thing that was here, and we're saying, hey, put that original thing back in front of this, please, and make sure that you have RGB only not checked. So we're not only RGB, we want to bring back the alpha of the original as well. And so this way, we're getting the solid stuff that we made, and then the glorps, we'll call them the glorps, that are connecting everything. And those are going to take on some of the colored qualities of the stuff that it is kind of pulling off of. And so you end up with this kind of business. And again, we are able to keyframe that blurriness from high values down to low values as you want things to kind of either be more soupy or less soupy. And you can kind of see as I increase this value, right, it becomes more nebulous or less nebulous as we adjust that value. So that can be super useful in bringing this effect together. And again, anything that we do, if you want to add extra geometry in here, you would do that in this space. So if you wanted to connect these with more sort of beams and lines or something to really flesh this out or to direct this in more ways, just remember that this is more of a rough sketch of what you're doing. And then you are treating on top of that to create your final look, and just takes a little bit of fiddling both ways. So hopefully this outlines a pretty useful technique that you can do raster-wise. To expand on it a little bit, let's say these transition periods kind of in here are not working out super well. Well, nothing's stopping us from simply adding just another blur to the overall thing, and then another clamp on it, like just so you can appreciate the difference if you were doing this with the curves versus the levels. Here's our curves. Here is me pinching the curves, and we end up kind of pinching that together. So you can kind of smooth your transitions a little bit if you find them to be a little bit harsh. So that's one way you could do that. Nice bit of business. However, it's not the only way. We also have access to something called the roughen edges. And the roughen edges is nice because it's going to apply sort of an overall blorpy vibe to this. The other thing that I like about the roughen edges is sometimes it does funny little things when you get the settings going. So you can end up with stuff feeling like it's a little bit more liquidy when it bounces back, and it takes a lot of the well, ironically, yeah, the roughness away when it's roughening the edges and kind of smooth things out. If you want to make the stuff smooth in the roughen edges, you want to use kind of a thick border. The border is how far in either direction away from the alpha that this is sort of working. So the higher that is, the glorpier it is, the lower it is, the more exact that it is. And then after that, we've got our edge sharpness, and the sharpness is the idea of how fuzzy that is. Now, if you use something like a 1, you're getting a crispy edge. If you go beyond 1, you can get even crispier than crispy. And maybe something like a 0.8 is going to be where you want. And then we get into things like the fractal influence, and you can see how cranking that up and down is how much of a wobbly fractal is coming into this thing. So you can fine tune this to be pretty close, right, to what you might want. Just remember that you're dialing it in. Again, the main theory behind all of this is pushing and then pulling. So making it indistinct, bringing it back together, making it indistinct, bringing it back together. And with that way, we can end up with procedural things happening in ways that are useful. I'll say, well, I've got time on this subject because I really tried to plot out today's stuff in the eventuality that Kyle's not going to be here. You know, we plan. We're smart people. We plan for these things. We had the idea that he would not be available, so that's why I've kind of over prepared my end of stuff. So this is just some stuff that you might want to be aware of with your CC comp, OSIT, or OSIT, however you want to pronounce that. You can put things in front. You could put them behind. So now it looks like those areas are like being pulled off of the center of these things. So that's something to think about, is which side do you want that to be on. Copy isn't going to do it, so you really want to be in front of or behind, or you may want to use things like add. So you can see here where if I use the additive mode, and then if I drop on those curves like that, you get this much more like floaty kind of feeling. Like this is much more, I want to say mucosal is maybe a word for what I'm seeing here, that we are getting, and you get these nice kind of hot spots where things come together and then they fade off. I find that to be very charming and good. But nothing stops you from having multiple CC composite stuff going on, or from using sort of different blending modes of things. So if you say wanted the connecting tissue of this to be white, well, we would introduce a fill into the mix, and then we would comp these things back over top. So now the connecting membranes, or whatever that is now coming into the middle as a different color. So we've got all of, yes, very, very snot adjacent, unfortunately. But yeah, and that's just a way that we can blend and mix in different ways. So CC composite is your friend. Make use of that by putting the original over top. If you wanted, you could just put a duplicate of this whole composition over the top if that feels more in line with what you're looking for. But if you want to keep it all in one layer, that's the way to do it. And that's right. Yeah, and roll it over on YouTube, pointing out. See this in sort of micro animations for buttons. A lot of buttons blorping into other buttons. In sort of vector contexts, we would probably use the. No, actually, you know what? I don't know if offset paths works in things like Lottie. Anyway, the point is, the methodology sticks. Combine, out, in, we're good. Okay. Let's move on to a third thing. Yes, halfway through time, moving on to a third thing. Therefore, it must be pizza time. I have some delicious pizza to share. So let's get into this pizza time example. And here we have some melty neon cheese coming out of a pizza. Yummers. That looks edible. And the idea behind this is, how are we going to make a big old patch of gross without having to necessarily get our hands on this thing and have to do all of the stuff inside? We could deploy a kind of similar methodology to before. We could be making a lot of basic shapes moving and changing those around where we would have kind of a granular control over which areas are stringy and getting larger. And it would really just look like rectangles and circles stretching away from each other. And go ahead with that. You can use the first two methods to figure those things out from that. But instead, what I thought is, what if we deployed friend of the show, favorite effect of the show, fractal noise, to bring this together? Well, Evan, fractal noise doesn't look anything like that. You're crazy. You keep trying to shoehorn fractal noise into our lives. You're ruining my life with fractal noise, Evan. Stop doing it. Well, the cheese here is mostly made of fractal noise. It's a few different things, but the upper cheese here is fractal noise that is then being clamped and put back and turned into stuff, and it's going to be good. It's going to be a good time, I promise. Let's not deal with it as cheese for now. Let's use it as just some fractal stuff so we can get into how this idea works and why this works and that type of thing. Yeah, that's right, Keys. I mean, fractals, everything is fractals if we think about it too hard. That's the idea. So in a certain context, we would say like, here is, actually, you know what? I'm going to start it. Let's start it over from scratch. Let's start it from nothing so I can really dip into this. We're going to make a solid. We're interested in things that are black and white because that's going to make this a little bit easier for us. I'm going to make put a fractal noise on top of this. Blorp. It looks like clouds. Not exactly what we want. And what we're going to do is we're just going to bring the contrast up. We might change from, say, basic to a turbulent smooth or like a dynamic or something like that. But the main thing we want to do is make sure that we are splining it up so that instead of not block, not linear, but a spline, and this is going to be a little bit smoother as we start to dial in this stuff. We're going to make it quite a bit larger, but we aren't going to use uniform scaling because any type of cheese needs to stretch. I think, Evan, this is looking a little bit more like cheese-ish if we deal with our heights and stuff. So which way? Let's have our cheese going thusly, I think. So we'll have the strands going this way. We're still not there. We're still marginally close. I'm going to keep bringing up the contrast, and I'm going to bring down the complexity. So the less complex we get, we're starting to look a little bit more like what we had hoped for, right? So by rocking the rails on this stuff, this is where we get. So from clouds to glorps in not too many phases. So let's start doing that idea. We've made it indistinct. Now let's make it clamp. Anyway, so we can do that using curves. I'm just going to put a threshold on that. So clunk. There we go. Hard edges. Good. Big thumbs up to us. We're crushing it. We're really doing it. But I mean, the threshold can be applied to the fractal at any type of sort of contrast. So if I bring the contrast down, let's come back, put the threshold back on. I'm going to rock the contrast. You notice there's no difference going on. There's no real difference as I rock the contrast on here because the threshold is doing that clamping for us. But what's interesting here is what if I were able to make some areas less fractally and other areas more fractally, right? What if I could see the fractal in more or fewer places? Well, we got a thing for that. I got a thing for that. It's called the rectangle tool, blarm. And I'm going to come into the effects, into the fractal noise, and I'm going to turn on the compositing options so that this effect is only seen where that is. And if I come into my mask and come into my feather, I'm now able to feather out that part. So we're getting these gray values, these black and white values. All right, so this is really only showing up in some parts of this. So far, so good, right? well, what happens if I threshold that? Oh, hello, right? This is looking like something now. Something's going on, right? And okay, so I'm able to cut it away. Well, how would I make it just be there, right? Well, there's a way that we can do that, and a nice way to kind of illustrate that is to just use a ramp. So I'll put a ramp on this. So let's put the ramp in before everything, and let's go back to the state where we just see the ramp. And the ramp looks something like this. We'll say, well, the fractal noise doesn't necessarily have to be everywhere. It doesn't have to be overwriting everything. Within the fractal noise itself, I'm going to come down and say, well, blend via overlay. So now the fractal noise only takes place in the middle zones. So we're only going to see the fractal noise in the gray area. The dark and the light, they're going to shine through super bright. That means we have areas of yes fractal, areas of totally solid, and areas of nothing. Cool. You could also, be working this up and down, but at this point, if we're relying on, we can use masks to control, and now we know that we can control this using black and white values. So I'm going to get rid of the mask for now. And if we come back on and thresholdize this, ooh, hello, it's a little bit crispy on the edges, but we're pretty close. Now, if something seems too crispy, it's probably because the values are too disparate. So bring back our old friend Ghost in the House blur. And go like that. So adding a little bit of blurriness, so you can see it gets less distinct, more distinct, too distinct, like that. So the threshold in this case is saying where this is going to be at. You can see that we now have many different types of ways to control how and where this is, depending on what we want to see happen. So over the course of this thing, if I wanted this to sort of seem like it's filling, I might do that. If it's emptying, I might do something like that, where it's sort of glorping itself away. If I wanted to make this move in a certain way, I could change the gradient. So you can see as the gradient spreads up something, or that it recedes up like this. So changing what areas are totally dark, totally light, and gray in between is going to change this boundary, you might say. And the fractal noise itself has qualities that we can manipulate here in the transform. So if something is wider or narrower, we could end up with that. If the height is greater or lesser, the taller you make it, the less likely you will see this detachment, the detachment of glorps. The detachment of glorps. New fantasy novel. So that's something to think about there. So effects-wise, we've now made something gross that relies on dark areas and light areas, and that's coming together. So let's combine this with an image real quick. 438. Evan's got to keep an eye on his fries before he doses them in gravy and curds to make national dish poutine. If you're in a part of the world that doesn't have poutine, let me know if I can help get you out of there. No, many countries have their own traditions of putting slime on fries. So just let me know what it's like where you are. If you have curry fries, if you're in the UK, I think that's a thing. Yeah, anyway, keep me posted on your situation. Oh, good. Kyle's sliming his way into the chat. Hello. Hope you're staying cool out there, buddy. You've actually come at a perfect time for us to enjoy. Here's Kyle from the airplane. As he looks pretty toasted. Or perhaps we will get. Hold on. I got some pictures of Kyle in the chat. Here we are. This is the one that I wanted. I'm just gonna go ahead and download this. There we go. So we'll just go ahead and put that. Yes, there's Kyle having a good time out on the road. He's loving this. Truffle fries, big. Chris, where are truffle fries going down? That sounds kind of bougie. No, it sounds great. I've had some truffle fries or Parmesan, Asiago fries. I eat fries in all of their permutations. Anyway, here's what we want. We want his hat to drip. We're going to make some stuff come down off of that. So if we come back to, let's go back into pizza time, the abstracted sort of method that we have here, some areas gross, some areas not gross. I can alter a lot of interesting things about this, but why don't I just use it? So I'm going to bring abstracted pizza time onto Kyle. I'm going to put it upside down like this. And it might be helpful for us to start to work this in a way that will sort of conform to where I want it. And so, sorry, my dog's going a little nuts. Yeah. Sherbert hears us talking about poutine. He's got to get into it. Maybe you hear him on the mic. So some things we want to touch up about this. We don't want the hard edge. We got to get rid of that. We want this to conform to this space. We got to make that happen. How shall we do this? Well, I think I'm going to try to bend this into place using the Bezier warp. So let's see if Bezier warp is going to be a friend to me today. And let's just start by kind of dialing in, get the sides sort of where we want. That's pretty close. And then let's kind of Bezier this bad boy in. So somewhere like there, and we'll get this line coming up there, and we'll bring this one here, and we'll get the line coming up a bit like that. I'm really hoping that I did not underestimate the fanciness of Kyle's brim shaping. So we'll find out. But maybe it's going to be something a little bit like that. And then we want the bottom of the Bezier warp to kind of conform a little bit better. So maybe it even kind of swoops in. So we're getting some real kind of cheese control. You need strong cheese control if you're going to do this type of thing. All right, so we'll kind of cut it there, and maybe it kind of expands a little bit like this, and then we push it back in like that. I don't know, something like this. Something like this. Maybe it's kind of like curtain water falling down. So how are we going to touch up the rest of it? Well, thing number one, some things need to be see-through, and that's just how it's got to be. So we are going to shift some channels. Boink. And we're going to take the alpha from the Luma. Hey, that's looking a bit too much. Oops, hold on, go back. Just do that first, if you wouldn't mind. Thanks. So there we go. We've got one problem solved. We're crushing it. So now he's got... Oh, Kyle, it looks like you had quite a run-in with a seagull over at the airport. Things are going quite well. Chris, you had a band in the 70s called Cheese Control. Well, that's a name I feel like I have heard. Okay, let's not digress too strongly. I've got a gradient ramp, I got a fractal noise, I got a blur that blurs it out. So the fractal noise, as we talked about, we probably want to control where that is. So let's go ahead and do just that with the pen tool. Blur, blur, bleem, blomp, bloink. Something like this. Okie doke. And we're just going to go ahead into the effects, into the fractal noise, and make sure that it is indeed using mask 1 as the compositing options. Thumbs up for that. So that's coming together pretty nicely, I think. Let's go ahead. Look at our threshold. So now it's looking a little bit like that. Some more of this. Make our mask feather a little bit. How's those edges looking when we thresholdize them? Okay, that's pretty good. But just conforming the fractal to that isn't working all the way. So we can just come in and say, well, actually the gradient ramp needs a little bit of that too. So compositing options. Hey, we got the same thing going on, guys. That's great. So now we can kind of shape this into a little mountain of gross. And that's going to work out a little bit. All right, so let's feather, feather, feather a little bit more. Okay, I'm feeling that. Now, what causes the burbly blorpiness? Well, that is caused by the fractal. So if I wanted to animate this, I might animate the evolution. Ah, that's looking nice and gross. So let's go ahead and do just that. So animating evolution, animating this forward. Give us one cycle, please. And we'll see how that looks. Like that. Let's go back to Kyle. How's he doing? He's got some glorp on his head. That's pretty good. This is what happens if I'm going to put a loop out onto this so that we can enjoy that. And within the evolution options, I'm just going to make sure that that is indeed cycling. So we can enjoy some cycling that happening. Good. Good. Excellent. Now, if you wanted this to be stretching down, right, as I think we do, I think that does make sense to do. Well, I would probably want to put a transform sort of on the back end of this, maybe, so that we are kind of scaling that as it gets bigger. Or maybe we are just going to kind of scale this layer itself so it feels like it's running, stretching, ew. But the thing that we actually want to be stretching and moving is the fractal noise itself. So if you keep sort of scaling the height in here, you can see that the peaks and valleys change. And if you were to move sort of the fractal verticality, that would change. But remember that the limiter for a lot of this is the gradient itself. So this gradient you would pull forward like this, and you start to get that creeping situation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag these off like that, and we are going to keyframe the start and end of the ramp of this so that we are moving from this sort of position where it's off frame to a position where it's more in frame, kind of like this. It doesn't need to go that far, but something like that. So we've got this flood kind of rolling over, and you're getting it. This is kind of like the blob situation like that. And you probably would want to like chill out the evolution a little bit, because that's not being particularly conducive. But now we have a true waterfall situation going on like that, like this. So that's wafting over. Now, cheese and rice, Kyle. What is that, a southern thing? No, I don't even know if Kansas is middle. Is that a middle America thing? I do like cheese and rice. Cheese and rice is good. I'm feigning ignorance because I want to big up my local stuff. Anyway, so this is one form of effects that can get you glorping. I'm of course remiss if I did not cover just briefly the other format of this, and maybe talk about how this works in with pizza. You can see, as we talked about, you can control where it is with a lot of effects. So the cheese in this case is being deployed in a few different ways. That we've got basically a fill that is creating that gradient, and the upper cheese is happening within areas on that, and then that's kind of getting blurred out a little bit. So in this case, the Gauss in the House blur is blurring out some fractal noise that's set to add. So we're adding lightness in here instead of overlay, because I want a little bit kind of harsher up at the top. And then we just threshold that, and you end up with this type of a vibe. Shift channels, kabam, fill it in with pink. You're good to go, right? And yeah, can we have a cheesy transition? Absolutely. Like, this is a good kind of way to make this wave over the camera, or to cascade down the top. So you've got ways to control where it is, right? Darkness or masks. That's going to say where is a possibility of slime chance, right? This, the fractal defines the slime itself, and then keyframing these various things, you can get all kinds of like artistic stuff going on. Anyway, I encourage people, play with it, use it, do interesting things. 5 minutes to go. Okay. We're gonna quickly get into the displace pizza. That the other forms of making the glorp line, we'll call it, and in this case, glorp line without holes. We are using what's called a displacement map. Now, we don't necessarily have to. Let's say the transition line is just using the linear wipe effect here on this solid, right? And we say, well, I know how to make that strange. So I'm going to go ahead and put a wave warp onto that. Okay, wave warp, I feel you. Do it, wave it. So now we got waves in a certain direction. Make them this height, make them this width. You can clean up the top if you want, or clip it, or however you do that. But feels altogether too regular. So if you wanted just slightly irregular waves, you can just start doing stuff like this, where we are just making blorpy waves. Here's a third one. Get some tighter waves. So congratulations, you've made normal style waves. I salute you with your normal waves. You could use the turbulent displace, a little turbulent displace on here, and as it says, right, the amount is how blorpy. One thing about when you really crank the amount, you get some holes in it, and that's not good. We don't want those holes unless that's kind of the vibe you're into, but you know, you can get indistinct or large, stuff like that. But where this falls down is that unfortunately, you don't have independent control over the horizontal and vertical. That's where our old ancient ally displacement map comes in, because you can separate horizontal and vertical, and you can have this only blorp out on the vertical. So then we just put in a fractal noise map, just like we were doing before. Paint out gray in some areas. We have previous many times we've talked about the displacement map. Go back to previous motion design hotlines to get into how we do that. But the Cole's notes on that is, again, a fractal noise combined with a fill, a mask to say what is filled, what is fractal. And in this case, I'm putting a 50% gray over top of the situation here, so that in the map, the area that is gray is not being displaced. The area that is fractal, black and white values, are being pushed vertically and horizontally. And you may even decide that, well, within my fractal noise, it only makes sense that this is sort of darker or brighter, and then you get this kind of push into the different directions. So hopefully a lot of that stuff made sense. I know we're kind of coming into the end of it here, so we're going to go back to looking at my face. Hopefully this was a good time learning about the different techniques that will hopefully give you a toolbox to really slime it up out there. I debated starting the show by saying, what up my slime? I think that's a term of affection amongst younger people, but then I chickened out and I didn't do it. So then I put this kind of non-joke joke at the end instead. But if you have any questions about any of this stuff, get at Kyle and I. Kyle is at Kylosaurus Rex. I'm at EC Abrams. There are a bunch of other smeary, gross effects stuff that we didn't get into in this, because I was trying to chop it down to just the Cole's notes, just the kind of big ones. Maybe on the leftovers, we'll have some leftover pizza next week and talk about some other of those things. Perchance, we shall see. But you got to make sure that you find us every Monday, most Mondays. I don't want to promise every Monday, but most Mondays. If you want to know when the shows are happening, motiondesignhotline.com, a real website for real people. Tell us your problems in After Effects, and we'll solve them right here. Yeah, thank you all so much for being with me. If you, like I say, if you want to get at us, that's our social medias. We're out there on all the places. But until next time, I guess be kind to each other, stay creative, and I will see you all around the internet. I think this is the end of our broadcast day here on Adobe Live. Hold on, let me confirm that. Yes, but shows kick off again tomorrow, so we got a lot of great stuff going on. Travel posters happening. We've got some mock-ups going down. Big full week of excellent stuff. Actually, after this, go watch more of Chris. So go do that. Go see what he was up to. Lovely talk that he was given. So if you missed that, go get it. All right. That's it for me. I'm hitting the time. Bye for now. And yeah, as Kyle says, bye. See y'all next time.